Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And once again, football season is upon us. For lifelong sports fans like myself, it's one of the best times of the year. The slate is clean, the path to the Super Bowl is open for everyone. And for the next several months, Sundays will be full of intrigue, drama, excitement, and yes, plenty of frustration. And like previous years, I'd like to offer my predictions and picks for the upcoming 2022 season. But unlike previous years, I'd also like to take the time to do something I've never been able to do before, which is brag about my picks from last season. Because last year, something miraculous happened. Well, two things actually. First, the Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, the Cincinnati Bengals made it to the Super Bowl. The fact that I can say that with a straight face right now is remarkable in and of itself. Well, I certainly didn't predict that. I did manage to accurately predict the eventual Super Bowl champion, the Los Angeles Rams. Now granted, it wasn't an overly bold prediction. Plenty of other people, both fans and experts alike, also picked them. Even so, bold or not, I got it right. That's something I never get to say when speculating about sports. So please, let me celebrate the fact that I actually got one right. Because it's very likely that this is a one-time fluke. It should in no way lead anyone to believe that I have more insight than any other football fan. I just happened to make an educated guess last year, and I guessed right. That's really all there is to it. So please keep that in mind as I prepare to share my picks and predictions. Just like previous years, I'll go division by division to pick a winner. Then, I'll speculate on who will end up in the Super Bowl as well as who might win. I didn't expect to get it right last year. I don't expect to get it right this year. But I'm still going to try and make some informed predictions about the 2022 NFL season. Not too long ago, this was the easiest division to predict in football. It was rarely a matter of whether the New England Patriots would win the AFC East. It was just a matter of how quickly they would clinch it. Tom Brady and Bill Belichick were just that dominant. But things have changed. Tom Brady is gone. Last year, his absence was really felt throughout the division and throughout the AFC. Yes, the Patriots were still a playoff caliber team, but Mac Jones is a long way from being Tom Brady, and the Buffalo Bills have been on a rapid ascent for the past 2 years. The way they utterly dominated the Patriots in the playoffs last year showed just how far they've come. Now, that's not to say the Bills are a lock for another division title. Watching the NFL for the past 2 decades has taught me to never count out Bill Belichick. He will make adjustments. He will make his team competitive. But it's not just the Patriots the Bills have to worry about this time around. The Miami Dolphins, despite some scandals with their owner, are a team on the rise. In the past offseason, they made a few bold moves, like trading for Tyreek Hill. And their quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, made real strides over the course of the season. If he can stay healthy, this team really could frustrate the Bills and the Patriots. Sadly, the New York Jets are still rebuilding. They're not pushovers, but they're still a few seasons away from being competitive. Be that as it may, this division is no longer as lopsided as it used to be. But despite the growing parity in the AFC East, I still think the Bills have the best team in the division. And I think they'll win another division title. It's just going to be a lot harder than it was last year. This was another division that used to be relatively easy to predict. It was always either the Ravens or the Steelers. It was one of the best rivalries in all of football, and between two teams who were never far from competing for a Super Bowl. But the past few years have really shaken things up, both on and off the field. Because seriously, who the hell thought the Cincinnati Bengals were going to make it all the way to the freaking Super Bowl? Take it from someone who has never seen them win a playoff game in his adult life. Them making the Super Bowl was the equivalent of pigs flying over the moon with a fleet of unicorns. That's just how impactful Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor have been for that team. They didn't just get hot. The Bengals proved they're a force to be reckoned with in the AFC North. Another statement that still sounds strange when I say it out loud. But as impressive as they were last year, I don't think the Bengals have the inside track to win the division. For one, Ben Roethlisberger is now retired, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have undergone a major overhaul, drafting a young quarterback in Kenny Pickett and signing a veteran in Mitch Trubisky. It's also worth noting that this team still made the playoffs with a quarterback who was incredibly limited. So starting someone new could give this team a fresh boost. On top of that, the Ravens still have Lamar Jackson last I checked. Even though he had a down year last season, and on a team plagued by injuries no less, he's still a playmaker on a very balanced team. And so long as they can avoid the kind of injuries they had last year, they too have a chance. As for the Cleveland Browns, well, the less said about their quarterback situation, the better. And less said about how they handled Baker Mayfield's departure, the better. It's no secret, they're in for a rough season to say the least. I won't completely count them out, but there are many non-football related forces working against them. But, as it stands, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are in the best position to win this division. Yes, what the Bengals did in 2021 was incredible, but I'm not yet convinced it was more than a fluke. For 2022, I'm going with the Steelers team with a playoff pedigree and fresh young energy at quarterback. Every year, it seems, the AFC South undergoes some kind of upheaval in the offseason. Because of that, it's one of the most frustrating divisions to predict in all of football. The days of Peyton Manning dominating the division are a distant memory now. For the past few years, nobody has really run away with this division. On paper, the Tennessee Titans are the best team. And I certainly think they're capable of making the playoffs. They have Derrick Henry. They have a solid defense and great coaching under Mike Vrabel. But if they do make the playoffs, I'm not convinced it'll be as a division champ. The Houston Texans have finally washed their hands clean of Deshaun Watson. And while their talent pool is a bit shallow at the moment, they were still a competitive team with Davis Mills at quarterback. And in the offseason, they made some moves that should make them even more competitive. However, their salary cap situation really held them back. It also didn't help that the Indianapolis Colts made some moves as well, bringing in quarterback Matt Ryan from Atlanta. That's a move that I believe will make the Colts contenders again. I still think Ryan has something to prove, and he also has one of the best running backs in the league in Jonathan Taylor behind him to help make things easier. But those improvements and overhaul aside, neither of those teams are my pick to win the division this year. And bear with me because this is where I'm going to get a little ballsy. Because I genuinely believe that the Jacksonville Jaguars are a sleeper team for the 2022 season. I believe they could do what the Bengals did in 2021 and surprise the entire league. That's not to say I think they'll make the Super Bowl, but I do think people are sleeping on just how talented this team is. I also think people are underestimating just how bad a coaching hire Urban Meyer was last year. He somehow managed to come into a talented team and ensure they lost over a dozen games. By contrast, Doug Peterson is a very capable coach, having brought the Eagles their first Super Bowl. His presence, as well as the continued development of Trevor Lawrence, will help this team shine in 2022. And with that in mind, I'll gladly make what might be my boldest prediction to date and say that the Jacksonville Jaguars will win the AFC South. Whenever I talk about the AFC West, I often preface it by reiterating that Patrick Mahomes is awesome. And yes, that sentiment still holds true. I believe he is the best quarterback in the division, as well as the best quarterback in the NFL at the moment. But as good as Patrick Mahomes is, he's still human. And his humanity really got exposed last year on many occasions. The Kansas City Chiefs might have won the division in 2021, but they were not nearly as dominant as they'd been in previous seasons. I get the sense that teams are starting to figure Mahomes and Andy Reid out. It showed just how close many division games were, and it also didn't help that their defense was one of the worst in the league for a while. Both the Los Angeles Chargers and the Las Vegas Raiders took full advantage of that. The Chargers especially showed that Justin Herbert is a capable starting quarterback in the NFL. He took a team that lacked skill players on offense and stayed competitive in one of the toughest divisions in the NFL. And while the Raiders did make the playoffs, they lost a few tight games against lesser teams. And losing their coach midseason to an off-the-field scandal certainly didn't help. But one of the biggest stories of the past offseason had to do with the Denver Broncos. They made what might have been the biggest move any team could have made in trading for Russell Wilson. There really aren't a whole lot of players who can change a team's fortune within the span of a single season, but I believe Russell Wilson is one of those players. Make no mistake, his presence at quarterback makes the Broncos instant contenders. They proved in the last 2 seasons that they can win games with defense. Now, they have a top-tier quarterback to help them win on offense as well. And during the Peyton Manning era, that helped them contend for the Super Bowl regularly. And while the Super Bowl might be a lofty goal for this season, I believe the Broncos will make a huge leap in 2022. The Chiefs are finally vulnerable, having lost Tyreek Hill to a trade to the Dolphins. The Chargers are also still lacking at skill positions on defense, and the Raiders, despite trading for Devontae Adams, still tend to underperform far too often. It will likely come down to the final week of the season, but I think the Denver Broncos will end the Chiefs' dominance atop the AFC West. I think they're fully capable of winning the division and even doing some damage in the playoffs. When it comes to predicting the NFL, few divisions are as consistently inconsistent as the NFC East. This is a division that hasn't had a back-to-back winner since 2004. Every team is either collapsing, rebuilding, dominating, or ascending. One year, a team like Washington wins the division with a 7-9 record. In another, the Eagles win it, go 13-3, and eventually win the Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. There's just no rhythm, rhyme, or reason for this division. And there hasn't been for nearly 2 decades. And I don't expect that to change this year. In 2021, the Dallas Cowboys were one of the most loaded teams in the NFL in terms of talent. But they once again underachieved at the worst possible time. May have dominated the division, but that was easy when Washington and New York were rattled with injuries. And the Eagles had almost no offensive weapons aside from Jalen Hurts. Now it's 2022. Dallas lost some key offensive weapons in the offseason. At the same time, the Eagles made a major trade for wide receiver A.J. Brown. While the Giants weren't able to make quite as many moves, they're getting back many of the injured players that were sidelined last year. And depending how well Daniel Jones plays in a contract year, they could surprise a few teams, but only to a point. As for Washington, well, I think last year exposed just how flawed they still are. Their once vaunted defense fell apart early and often. And now, they're trying to fill their need at quarterback with Carson Wentz, someone who hasn't been the same since getting hurt in 2017. I feel like this team is much more likely to collapse rather than compete in 2022. And I think they're more likely to be competing for the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft rather than a division title. For now, the Cowboys and the Eagles have the most complete teams, relatively speaking. And I believe they'll be neck and neck for much of the season. But, given the Cowboys' tendency to underperform when it matters most, I'm going to give the edge to the Eagles this year. They have more talent on offense. They still have a solid defense that got even stronger in the offseason. The Eagles may not win it by much, but I do believe they'll win the NFC East in 2022. You can't talk about the NFC North without talking about Aaron Rodgers. That has been the case for over a decade now. He is one of the best quarterbacks of our generation. And by many measures, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. The only stat in which he's lacking is Super Bowl titles. Now, I'll go on record as saying that's not entirely his fault. It's not just that football is a team sport. Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers have just had some of the worst luck of any regular playoff team. Last year's loss against the 49ers was certainly not his fault. A special teams gaffe in the fourth quarter cost them the game in the divisional round. And losing their best receiver in Devontae Adams in the offseason certainly didn't help. So in that context, it's understandable why Aaron Rodgers regularly flirts with retirement. But if there's one thing that he and the Packers have going for them, it's that the rest of the NFC North isn't all that strong. The Chicago Bears are still trying to build around Justin Fields as their quarterback, but still lack offensive weapons. The Minnesota Vikings have been building around Kirk Cousins at quarterback for years now, but their defense and lack of depth frequently work against them late in the season. As for the Detroit Lions, well, if that team didn't have bad luck, then it wouldn't have any luck at all. Them losing a game last year on a 67-yard field goal to the Ravens is a perfect demonstration of why this team is so snake-bit. Now, none of that is to say that the Packers are a lock to win the division this year. I do think it's possible for the Bears or the Vikings to get hot at just the right time. But the Packers still have the better team on both sides of the ball, and Aaron Rodgers still has a lot to prove. So long as he and the main playmakers on offense stay healthy, I think the Packers will win the division. But beyond that, it's just a matter of whether they'll get any lucky breaks in the playoffs. Whereas Aaron Rodgers can count on bad luck at the worst possible times, Tom Brady has had enough lucky breaks to fill multiple careers. Seriously, how many has he had since that fateful day when Mo Lewis injured Drew Bledsoe? And since leaving the Patriots for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, his legendary lucky streak has only continued. He's now playing in a division in which the three other teams don't have a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, let alone a future Hall of Famer like Drew Brees or Matt Ryan. Atlanta is now trying to retool with Marcus Mariota, and New Orleans is still trying to get by with Jameis Winston. But neither team has much in terms of talent or depth at the skill positions. The Saints getting Michael Thomas back certainly helps, but that alone is not enough to keep Tom Brady and the Bucs from another playoff push. I also don't see the Carolina Panthers being a real threat this year. I think trading for Baker Mayfield was a good move. Last year proved that Sam Darnold has too low a ceiling, and they're at least a couple years away from being a competitive team, even if Mayfield proves to be a long-term starter. While I certainly wouldn't call the Panthers, Saints, and Falcons bad teams, they're all in the midst of rebuilding and revamping. By contrast, the Buccaneers are a finished product. And once again, Tom Brady will have an easy road to yet another division title and yet another Super Bowl run. All that being said, I don't think the Bucs will be nearly as dominant outside their division. It's still not clear whether Rob Gronkowski will return, and some of their key starters from their Super Bowl team have since moved on. They were also exposed at many points last year by lesser teams. Once they eventually played a real contender in the Los Angeles Rams, they just couldn't keep up. Still, Tom Brady's knack for playing at a high level and winning championships is beyond dispute. He will have a chance at winning his 8th Super Bowl in 2022. Whether or not he gets one depends on many factors aside from luck. But in terms of winning the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just have too much working in their favor. It's a common refrain in the NFL. The most capable contenders often come from the most competitive divisions. And few divisions were more competitive in 2021 than the NFC West. The Los Angeles Rams might have been the most talented team on paper, but just winning their division was a year-long struggle. and I truly believe it factored heavily in their eventual triumph in Super Bowl 56. This year, I think the NFC West will be every bit as competitive. The Arizona Cardinals extended Kyler Murray in the offseason and invested heavily in the offense by signing A.J. Green. The San Francisco 49ers also locked up Deebo Samuels while setting up Trey Lance as their quarterback of the future. These are both playoff caliber teams who needed to add depth in the offseason, and that's just what they did. The only team that really took a step back was the Seattle Seahawks. An incredible era ended when they traded away Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. And I honestly don't see Drew Lock or Geno Smith filling that void this year. But still, the Seahawks are rarely an easy win, even when they're rebuilding. And while I do expect them to finish at the bottom of the division, I think they'll still make things difficult for the Rams to repeat. But even with the Seahawks posing less of a threat, I also don't see the Rams repeating the same success they had last year. They really did go all in on a Super Bowl in 2021. And there's really only so much you can do in the salary cap era to keep a team intact. I still think they'll make the playoffs, but not as a division champion. For the 2022 season, I think the San Francisco 49ers will take that title. I believe this is the year that Trey Lance truly takes over. And I'm going to make another bold prediction and say he'll thrive in Kyle Shanahan's system. It may mean that Jimmy Garoppolo is gone by the trade deadline, but I think Lance will carry this team back to the playoffs. And if the defense plays anywhere near as well as it did last year, they could be real contenders. With few exceptions, I think most divisions will be very competitive this year. I also believe the competition for wildcard spots will be a lot closer than usual, especially in the AFC. I can easily see the Raiders, Chargers, Chiefs, Colts, Ravens, and Dolphins fighting for those final slots. It'll definitely make the last 2 weeks of the regular season very interesting. But as it stands, I think the Colts, Chargers, and Ravens have the best shot. But it will likely come down to which team gets hot at the right time. In the NFC, the talent disparity is greater, but not by much. I think the Buccaneers and Packers will be the top contenders in the conference, but I could just as easily imagine the Eagles, Rams, Cowboys, and Vikings finding a rhythm just in time for a playoff run. This might end up being one of those years where being a top seed means less than usual in the playoffs. Even with Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers playing at a high level for their respective teams, I don't think anyone will be overly dominant. I also think the San Francisco 49ers are one of those sleeper teams who could make a Super Bowl run. I also think a team like the Eagles or the Vikings could pull some major upsets in the early rounds of the playoffs. But when all is said and done, I think we'll see a lot of familiar faces in the championship game. I think it'll come down to the Buccaneers facing off against the Packers or the 49ers. But whether by luck or uncanny talent, Tom Brady will eventually find a way to make it back to the Super Bowl, much to the chagrin of every other fan base. But in the AFC, I think the Buffalo Bills will be the ones who come out on top. Last year, they lost a true heartbreaker against the Kansas City Chiefs. That game was one of the most exciting football games I have ever seen in my life. And because of how it ended, I think it'll motivate the Bills to push just a little bit harder this year, beating either the Steelers or the Chiefs in the championship game. That'll help set the stage for an epic showdown between my two Super Bowl picks, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Buffalo Bills. Last year, I only got the final matchup of Super Bowl 56 half right. But I did manage to pick the correct winner in the LA Rams. While I am proud of that, I must reiterate that was a lucky guess that still wasn't much of a guess. The Rams were a popular offseason pick to win the Super Bowl last year. And this year, my prediction is similar in that it's not overly bold. Most agree that the Buccaneers and the Bills are great teams. They both have championship caliber rosters. And barring injury, they both have what it takes to make a Super Bowl run. I think them meeting in the final game would be a hell of a matchup for multiple reasons. But the stakes would be much higher for Bills fans, because I doubt they've forgotten the past 2 decades of dominance that Tom Brady enjoyed over them, often treating the Bills like a tune-up game. But those Bills teams were not nearly as talented or as motivated as the team he'll end up facing in 2022. With Josh Allen growing into a very capable quarterback and Sean McDermott blossoming into one of the league's best young coaches, this is not a team Brady can dominate like he did when he was in New England. I also think that the 2022 Buccaneers, if they make it this far, won't be as loaded as the 2020 team that won the Super Bowl. Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, but even he can't win without a balanced team on both sides of the ball. And this time around, I don't think he'll be able to carry his team to another Super Bowl banner. It'll likely be a shootout, one that pits a future Hall of Famer against an up-and-coming talent. But in the end, I believe this is the Bills' year. This is the year where they finally finish what Marv Levy couldn't in the early 90s. And it'll be a glorious day for Bills fans everywhere, with a final score of 35-31. Every new NFL season brings hope, possibility, and excitement. And every year, it seems, certain teams get hot that you don't expect, and other teams you think are contenders end up collapsing spectacularly. It's a big reason why the NFL is the most dominant brand in American sports. And it's a big reason why I look forward to every season. Even though I got very lucky last year with my picks, I won't claim that all or even some of my predictions will pan out. In fact, I hope plenty of them end up being wrong, because that would mean the season took an unexpected turn. And when expectations shatter, excitement and drama often follow. Right up until the confetti falls on the Super Bowl 57 champion. I hope other fellow football fans do the same. To those same fans, what do you think of my predictions? Do you think they're accurate? Or am I dead wrong? It's impossible to know for now, but we'll all find out soon enough. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.